Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans. Ever notice how the need to be right can at times dominate your interactions with others? What is it inside us that drives that impulse? You might notice that I use the phrase, the need to be right. But within the NVC framework, being right is not a need. But it sure feels like it, doesn't it? It can feel like there's absolutely no other option. And in that sense, it can feel very much like a basic necessity, in the same way the need for food, air, and water are needs. If I'm not right, I might not survive. I thought it would be interesting to explore being right, place it under the microscope, so to speak. Now, there are different kinds of being right, aren't there? For instance, you might be right about the quickest route to the theater, and Google Maps will even confirm it for you, which is absolutely important if you're a front seat passenger and your partner is driving. The app tells you that your route is 0.3 kilometers quicker, less than 2 minutes than the route your partner took by turning on a different street. Isn't it wild how pointing this out can potentially ruin the rest of your evening? And then there's being right about who said what. You absolutely said you would call me before 5, and now you're telling me you said 6. You didn't. You said 5. These pointless, petty arguments that do nothing but make us bitter. And what about the meatier subjects? Being right about proper nutrition, climate change, politics, injustices, Even when the conversations start out calmly, they can so easily escalate into, I'm right, you're wrong. You know what I'm talking about, right? For our purposes, what I'm especially interested in is the mechanics of what happens inside us when we feel that energy rising up, and how when we don't intervene, we lose access to our reasoning power. I remember reading in Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, that the amount of time between a threatening stimulus and our internal response is less than 1/4 of a second. Extraordinarily fast. The limbic system is activated with lightning speed, and the amygdala directs us into fight or flight. And when it comes to being right, it quite often becomes the fight to be right. When you reflect on the being right arguments that you've experienced in your own life, and that have perhaps consumed more time than you care to admit, what would you say was ultimately under threat in those moments? What were you fighting so hard to protect? And how enmeshed was your positive self-esteem with proving yourself right? Did your sense of self somehow depend on you winning the argument? And if you did win on the basis of factual evidence, was it really a win? In situations where you were right and a loved one was wrong, how did this so-called win impact your relationship? What did you lose in the act of being right? Hence the saying, do you want to be right, or do you want to be married? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be in relationship? For anyone who wishes to cultivate healthy, enduring, and satisfying relationships, it's essential to commit to a rigorous practice of self-awareness. Why do I do what I do? What do I really want? In what ways do I sabotage myself and push away the very things that I desire? How do I alienate others? What part of myself orchestrates my destructive habits? What part of myself stands back and watches? What happens to the part of me that deeply wants things to be different? Where does it go? The most important work is to begin asking these types of questions. There should be no pressure to come up with fixed and final answers. In fact, anyone who has explored these questions over an extended period of time knows quite well that what you may discover today will not extinguish the questions themselves, but instead will deepen them. I recall a few sentences that I wrote down as I was listening to one of poet David Whyte's recordings. I'm afraid I don't recall which recording it was, but this is what he said. Quite often we're stuck. We can't move because we can't get the bigger story. We keep using the same language that has been determined by the small world that we're trying to escape. And we're stressed by that language, and we're overwhelmed by it. Yeah, those are very good words. And in Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication process, he makes clear that the language of right and wrong is disconnecting and life alienating. It's a way of dividing the world and its inhabitants into two camps. Right-wrong thinking generates a static lens that makes it extremely challenging to see anything other than what we've described. Do we see what's in front of us, or do we see what we describe? Now, it's not like we willingly impose alienating ways of thinking upon ourselves and others. We don't, at least not in the beginning. We have our own biology to contend with. Here's an excerpt from Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, from Chapter 2, Anatomy of an Emotional Hijacking. The seat of all passion. In humans, the amygdala, from the Greek word for almond, is an almond-shaped cluster of interconnected structures perched above the brainstem, near the bottom of the limbic ring. There are two amygdalas, one on each side of the brain, nestled toward the side of the head. The human amygdala is relatively large compared to that in any of our closest evolutionary cousins, the primates. The hippocampus and the amygdala were the two key parts of the primitive nose brain that in evolution gave rise to the cortex and then the neocortex. To this day, these limbic structures do much or most of the brain's learning and remembering. The amygdala is the specialist for emotional matters. If the amygdala is severed from the rest of the brain, the result is a striking inability to gauge the emotional significance of events. This condition is sometimes called affective blindness. Lacking emotional weight, encounters lose their hold. One young man whose amygdala had been surgically removed to control severe seizures became completely uninterested in people, preferring to sit in isolation with no human contact. While he was perfectly capable of conversation, he no longer recognized close friends, relatives, or even his mother, and remained impassive in the face of their anguish at his indifference. Without an amygdala, he seemed to have lost all recognition of feeling as well as any feeling about feelings. The amygdala acts as a storehouse of emotional memory and thus of significance itself. Life without the amygdala is a life stripped of personal meanings. More than affection is tied to the amygdala. All passion depends on it. Animals that have their amygdala removed or severed lack fear and rage, lose the urge to compete or cooperate, and no longer have any sense of their place in their kind's social order. Emotion is blunted or absent. Tears, an emotional signal unique to humans, are triggered by the amygdala and a nearby structure, the cingulate gyrus. Being held, stroked, or otherwise comforted soothes these same brain regions, stopping the sobs. Without an amygdala, there are no tears of sorrow to soothe. Joseph Ledoux, a neuroscientist at the Center for Neuroscience at New York University, was the first to discover the key role of the amygdala and the emotional brain. Ledoux is part of a fresh breed of neuroscientists who draw on innovative methods and technologies that bring a previously known level of precision to mapping the brain at work, and so can lay bare mysteries of mind that earlier generations of scientists have found impenetrable. His findings on the circuitry of the emotional brain overthrow a long-standing notion about the limbic system, putting the amygdala at the center of the action and placing other limbic structures in very different roles. Ledoux's research explains how the amygdala can take control over what we do, even as the thinking brain, the neocortex, is still coming to a decision. And as we shall see, the workings of the amygdala and its interplay with the neocortex are at the heart of emotional intelligence. Most intriguing for understanding the power of emotions in mental life are those moments of impassioned action that we later regret once the dust has settled. The question is how we so easily become so irrational. Take, for example, a young woman who drove 2 hours to Boston to have brunch and spend the day with her boyfriend. During brunch, he gave her a present that she'd been wanting for months, a hard-to-find art print brought back from Spain. But her delight dissolved the moment she suggested that after brunch they go to a matinee of a movie she'd been wanting to see, and her friend stunned her by saying he couldn't spend the day with her because he had a softball practice. Hurt and incredulous, she got up in tears, left the cafe, and on impulse threw the print in a garbage can. Months later, recounting the incident, it's not walking out that she regrets, but the loss of the print. It is in moments such as these, when impulsive feeling overrides the rational, that the newly discovered role of the amygdala is pivotal. Incoming signals from the senses let the amygdala scan every experience for trouble. This puts the amygdala in a powerful post in mental life, something like a psychological sentinel, challenging every situation, every perception, with but one kind of question in mind, the most primitive. Is this something I hate? That hurts me? Something I fear? If so, if the moment at hand somehow draws a yes, the amygdala reacts instantaneously, like a neural tripwire, telegraphing a message of crisis to all parts of the brain. In the brain's architecture, the amygdala is poised something like an alarm company, where operators stand ready to send out emergency calls to the fire department, police, and a neighbor whenever a home security system signals trouble. That's the end of the passage from Goleman's book. Now, most of us know that arguing about who's right is completely pointless, and that doing so will have negative consequences. And still, we do it. Is it because we're completely crazy? Well, after hearing what I just read about our amygdalas, one might think we are. The neocortex, after all, goes offline when the amygdala is fully activated, and so we're only functioning with half a brain in those triggered moments. And anything we say or do at those times can easily lead to tragic results. I'm wondering, though, could it be that what we call the need to be right might actually, in truth, be the need to feel safe and secure? The kind of safety and security that ensures our survival. This understanding shouldn't justify negative outbursts or poor behavior, but it does explain it. This is why practices like self-inquiry around our motivations and behaviors can be so revealing and therapeutic. This is why learning how to tolerate distress and manage conflict effectively are so crucial to our relational lives. We want to be able to bring the neocortex back online so that we can have meaningful conversations and challenge our self-limiting beliefs around safety, and unhook our sense of self and sense of goodness from being right. This concludes this week's episode. Send me your thoughts, comments, questions. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.